All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Real Estate Case Files. We are trying to get Sarah on here as well, having a little bit of a technical issue, but we're trying to get her back on. Morning, Vince. Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Everybody good? Well, appreciate you all being on. So this is Real Estate Case Files, and again, while I'm waiting for Sarah to get on, she was just on and then vanished, and now it looks like she's trying to jump back on. There we go.
You just can't see me.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Oh, we could. It's not working.
Yeah, I see the button where I can change it, and it just doesn't let me.
Interesting. Okay. Well, at least we can hear you.
Yeah.
So, morning, Lisa. Morning, Leo. Good morning, everybody. So, welcome. Morning, Chandra, over on Facebook. Good morning, everybody. So, thank you all for being on. Appreciate it. Real estate case file. So, what we like to do here, we do this periodically. We like to run through scenarios that have happened and how we can learn from them, how we can make sure they don't happen again, how we can make sure it's just use it as a learning lesson. I feel that, and I think everyone on this call right now would agree that no matter how many transactions we have done, we learn something from every one. So it doesn't matter if you've done one transaction or 1,000 transactions, chances are you're learning from every one because different things pop up. Now we've all had those super easy closings that are fantastic, right? That are just everything seems flawless, it just goes smooth, everything's great. And then we've all had those closings that are very, very challenging. Maybe it's something we messed up or we missed or we had an oversight on, or maybe it was something the other agent on the other side messed up on. Maybe it's something the client did. Maybe it's something the client hid. Who knows? Whatever the reason is, things pop up. So we like to run through real world scenarios that have happened and talk through them so that way we can make sure we're being educated and we're continuing to improve our skill set as agents. So let's dive in. Sarah, what's the first one we have today?
The one we're talking about, we had considered talking about floodplains. What happens if you don't notice before writing a contract that your home is in a floodplain? What does that mean for your buyers? And what to do if you miss your insurance deadline?
Yeah, so let's start with the floodplain. If the house is in a floodplain and you miss it, so let's say so we know that where can we look for the house to be in a floodplain? One, it should be disclosed in the seller's disclosure. Two, there should be a box checked on Maris. There's also a floodplain map in Maris as well. But let's just say, for instance, if all of that gets missed, because it can happen, right? Especially if you haven't, you're newer into this, it can happen where we're missing it. We don't see it in the seller's disclosure. We don't see it in the MLS. We write an offer and get it accepted, and then we see it's in a floodplain after the fact. What happens? Well, we're kind of stuck in a lot of regards. And let's just say we're past inspections. We're past the inspection deadline, the insurance deadline, the loan commitment deadline, all of that. We're in a bad spot. Now, what we can do is just call the owner, or excuse me, your buyer, and just own up to it. Look, I saw this was in a floodplain. Maybe they knew about it. Maybe they did know it was in a floodplain and they're okay with it. Or maybe they didn't, but the last thing we want to do though is not disclose it, because chances are as soon as they call their insurance company, it's going to come up and then they're going to be really upset. So there's not a good resolution to this problem. The best resolution is making sure it doesn't happen. So I would say if you're writing offers for buyers, 100% of the time, make sure you're checking the seller's disclosure to see if it's in a floodplain and making sure that you're looking on Maris as well. Sarah, that flood map, that's pretty easy to navigate, correct?
Yes, it's the same map where you can see school districts and general plot lines, and all of that is right in there. And you can see different colors for different years of floodplain problems, whether it's a 100 year or the 500 year. And then with those generalized plot lines, you can also see if the house itself sits in the floodplain. That's a much bigger deal than if just the corner of a lot. So if it's just like the back corner of the lot, or there's a lower area that, runs into a creek, it's generally not a problem. It's usually when a structure is in that floodplain area.
Yeah, good point. So some parts, we've had that in the past too, where there's like a corner of the lot and maybe it's a half acre lot, a corner of it or a portion of it's in a floodplain, but the house is not, that's going to make a difference as well. But the biggest thing here that I would say is that make sure that's something you're checking all of the time. Anytime you're writing an offer, check to make sure it's in a floodplain. Even if you don't think, like we had a house in a subdivision many years ago that you would never think was in a floodplain, but there was a creek that was a ways back, and about 2 feet of the lot was in a floodplain. So it did require some level of flood insurance, which of course increased the buyer's insurance. And it was all disclosed. We just didn't catch it. So make sure we're checking that 100% of the time. I think it's very important. It's going to save you a lot of pain and anguish, learning, we're doing it in the beginning and alerting your client of it in the beginning. And it is disclosed again in multiple places, seller's disclosure, MLS, look at the flood map. So that's about all I've got on that, is make sure you're checking that all of the time. Even if you think it's a property that has no business being in a floodplain, sometimes you might be surprised. Anything else to add?
I check it on sell side and buy side. It's part of my intro processing. It's one of those things that you don't check it until you have a problem, and then you end up checking it on everyone going forward. So take our experience as your learning and check it.
Definitely. Yes. 100% of the time, whether you have a listing or a buyer. Good point on that. Even if you're listing a property, check it as well to make sure, because maybe for some reason the seller didn't know, part of their lot was rezoned or whatever the case may be. Who knows? Things happen. So 100% of the time, check it out. The next one is insurance. So we're going to give you an example here on a seller. We had a buyer, we wrote an offer, and during the inspection, remember, keep in mind, there's a 10-day window generally on our contracts to get insurance or call your insurance company. Well, what happened was the seller filed a claim for the roof, and he pocketed the money. He or she pocketed the money and did not put a new roof on, and just took the money and spent it. So what's important about that? One is that if you have the buyer, make sure you're letting them know they need to contact their insurance agent immediately as soon as they get a house under contract, because the insurance company was the one that caught it when they called to get a quote. You know how all these insurance companies' systems are tied together. They saw that there was a claim, no new roof had been put on, seller put the money in their pocket, and we were able in that instance to get the seller to put the roof on. So keep in mind, though, if this was something where we're outside of our 10-day window, or let's just say we're waiting, they don't find out about it until a day or 2 or 3 before closing because they didn't call their insurance company, because maybe they didn't know. Maybe we didn't tell them, or maybe they just weren't aware. And now all of a sudden we're scrambling last minute right before closing to try to get this roof thing resolved. So keep in mind, when you're submitting an offer and you get it accepted, let your client know they need to call their insurance company immediately and get an insurance quote on the property. And so that's going to be very important. The insurance company is going to ask for the address. They're going to put it into their system. They're going to pull the information on it. They're going to see if there are any past claims on the property. And that way it's going to avoid any kind of issues like this, or at least give you a lot more time to resolve an issue. For us, it was a pretty easy resolution. Seller knew took the claim. There was not a whole lot they could do to try to fight it. And they said, okay, we'll put the roof on. Mm-hmm. So just keep that in mind as well. Make sure you're alerting your clients right away once they go under contract to call the insurance company. Anything to add into that, Sarah?
Yeah, and some people get excited about that insurance, talking to the company, and it's not that they have to decide. They don't have to do these 4 or 5 quotes with different insurance companies and figure out who they're going with within the first 10 days. That's not what this is about. It's about making sure that this particular home doesn't have an outstanding claim, does or does not have flood needed coverage. So just that initial conversation where somebody that they trust can look up that home, because things like the roof is tied to the property, not necessarily the owner.
Exactly. Very important. So again, 2 things to keep in mind when submitting an offer and when getting a listing as well. I would ask your seller, did you file any claims on the property during your ownership? Like, those are things to know. So you're absolutely right, but making sure your client gets the insurance quotes immediately. They're reaching out to their insurance agent immediately after they put a home under contract. It's going to be very important. All right, Sarah, what do we do if we have a closing and it doesn't fund the same day?
You get lots of cranky clients.
Lots of cranky clients, absolutely.
So to start, there are lots of things, lots of moving parts on closing day that most of the time the agents don't have any control over. But the idea that you are talking to the title company, the other clients, the lender several times on closing day. And so reasons that this may happen would be that the lender wasn't ready, docs weren't ready for some last minute reason or some unknown reason. Yesterday we had a title issue where they were trying to get an affidavit signed from a previous owner, not even the seller. It was a previous owner that needed to release their responsibility and basically fix that chain and title. And so it was down to the wire getting that completed. And then, so there could be a lender issue, there could be a title issue. It could be that the client signed late in the day and therefore did not get to transfer paperwork back and forth to the title company, which is when they consider it funded. Some lenders will pre-send all of the funds and have it scheduled to arrive at the title company the morning of closing. Some lenders refuse to send funds until documents are executed. And so you want to make sure that you have your clients, specifically buyers, sign early in the day, before noon. Like for me, it's a non-negotiable. The latest that sellers or buyers with a quick and efficient title company can sign is 2 p.m. And basically they leave the closing table and they have to run to the funding desk to get this money and paperwork transferred. So don't push your timeline to 2 p.m. And then just as a reminder, sellers can pre-sign. In almost every situation, they can pre-sign. Buyers usually cannot because lenders require same-day notarization of the documents, but sellers can pre-sign. And so there's so many moving parts. And so what happens if it doesn't fund that day? The buyers have closed late, the lender docs are late, whatever that is, it's come 3 and 4 o'clock and you're up against the wire deadline with the title company. And if you have a good closer, they're going to be reaching out to you and saying, I don't have funds. I can't see that they're on the way. You need to call the buyer's agent and or the lender, depending on what side you're on. So at that point, everybody's making phone calls, trying to figure out what the delay is, if they see anything happening. So let's say all of that's happening. You're still funding late. There's nothing you can do. So you've got a couple of things to consider. The buyers have already planned. They're probably moving in with their movers as you speak, and it's not being funded at 4 p.m. Who owns the house at that point? At 4 p.m., the sellers still own the house. So the buyers could have property in the house. And so you could potentially write up a document, or there's a document in the SLAR docs for, to cover this situation. Most of the time it's okay, and it's usually just overnight. But if you do have a seller that is concerned about this, look at those SLAR docs to get you covered as far as who's responsible for what if somebody were to fall and break a leg or the house burn up, overnight. And so usually what happens is everybody knows the funding is coming. Everybody knows that the documents have been executed, and they're like, your sellers will just get money the next day. And so usually that happens early in the morning, as long as it really is just a delay in time.
So yeah, so all great information there. And I think a couple of things to keep in mind too is I probably would never close on Friday or try to avoid Friday closing as much as possible for this exact reason, because if for some reason it doesn't fund on Friday, let's say it's 3, 4 o'clock, it's not going to fund now. Sometimes sellers can say, well, no, you're not moving into my house. Although it's technically closed, it's not funded. And then you're fighting to figure out what to do with your buyers, where they can go, how to get them in the house. Their stuff's in moving trucks. Now they're really upset. So I would avoid Friday closings because now potentially it could go until Monday, right? So they could be out the whole weekend, and that's not a good look for us as a realtor. The other thing I would say as well is title and lender, they're part of your team, right? So making sure that you are staying in touch with them throughout the process is very, very, very important. It's not to assume that no news is good news. Well, I haven't heard anything, so everything should be moving forward. I'm assuming it's moving forward. Don't assume that. Be calling your title company, be calling your lender, constantly getting updates hopefully they're calling you and giving you updates. But if not, I would be calling them throughout the process, getting updates to make sure things are moving smoothly. Maybe there's docs that the buyer still needs to get the lender and he's having trouble, he or her having trouble getting the docs. Could you call the client, your client, and help them get those documents? So I think that's very important, that communication, constant communication throughout the process, not just saying, well, I haven't heard anything, so I'm assuming we're moving to closing. So I think that's, and Sarah, do you see that as well? Do you see with our title companies and stuff and lenders that they're giving us updates, or are we having to reach out more for updates?
It depends really if you have somebody that's proactive, somebody that sees the client as their own as well. Otherwise some of them don't give you any notification. So really building that relationship, and like you said, knowing that they are part of your team and they represent you, as well as have to work for the mutual clients because they're getting paid by your client as well. Just make sure that you trust them. And if you don't, you're calling them every hour,
Definitely. Because at the end of the day, if you did let's say you did a fantastic job on the transaction, everything went smooth, you got through inspections, everything's moving, and then there's a huge issue at closing. All that client's going to remember is the huge issue at closing. It's the end. It's the final piece of the transaction. We want that to be as smooth as possible. And chances are, even if you didn't refer the title company, now we know most of the time that, a lot of clients, it's rare that a client has their own title company they want to use, maybe investors, or it does happen occasionally. But I'd say about 80% of the time, we as agents are most likely recommending the title company. And so when we do that, that's on us, right? So that's our referral. Even if we didn't recommend it, they're still not going to be happy with the transaction. And that's the final piece of it. So making sure you're keeping in touch with the lender, with the title company, even on the sell side, reaching out to the agent and asking, how are things going? Is everything moving forward? How are we looking? Are we on target to close? Making sure we're doing that. So again, there's no last minute things popping up the day before, the day of closing that could cause it not to fund that day. So a couple of pointers there: constant communication with title and lender, and also avoid closing on Fridays would be my recommendation. Another reason to avoid closing on Fridays, it takes you longer to get paid too.
Yes.
Because then, the check doesn't show up until Monday generally. So if you, just keep that in mind. Midweek, like Tuesday, Wednesday closings generally.
Yeah, for sure. Even the ones would have an overnight delay of closing. A lot of times your compensation check will not get into the overnight mail, or you will have a delay on your commissions as well, even if it's just a one night overnight delay.
Mm-hmm. So for me personally, I always like to try to schedule them Tuesday, Wednesday when possible. That way, if something does pop up, an issue pops up, we've got Thursday, Friday to try to get it resolved if necessary. Do not like Friday closings for the reason, as I mentioned, that it moves into the weekend. And potentially your buyer, could be homeless for the weekend. What does that look like, right? It's just a lot of things that could have been potentially avoided. So some things to keep in mind there. Anything else to add into that, Sarah, before we move on?
I think pretty much cover it. Don't undervalue your team in every aspect.
Agreed. Absolutely. And then what about this one? What miscellaneous seller costs can a seller expect at closing? Sellers will ask that. How much do I have to pay at closing?
Mm-hmm.
So look at your title company as well. So one thing I would recommend to everybody is make sure you check your settlement statements. And what I would ask my title company to do is send me the settlement statement before they even send it to the client. So I want to review that. I need to make sure commissions are correct, because that can be an issue. Do you see that happen often, Sarah, where commissions aren't right?
Not so much, because I know that that's a big deal, for clients and for agents. So I'm pretty descriptive about that in the very beginning. But it does happen, whether a commission had changed or what I see missed a lot or the most is like a seller credit or a change in seller compensation to the buyer after inspections. So you have $1,000 to $2,000 credit, whatever that looks like. You get a fully execute amendment, but then you don't think about sending it to the title company and lender because you've already sent them things. So every amendment needs to go to the title company and the lender. They'll decide if it's relevant. Just make sure that you keep sharing that back to every member of your team so that you don't have to get that statement, say, oh crap, we're missing a $1,500 seller credit, and then have to scramble for new statements, because then your title company, is scrambling, your lender is scrambling.
Good point. Yeah, gets missed all the time. We have an inspection done in lieu of repair. Seller is going to credit the buyer $1,000, whatever the case may be. We get an amendment signed. We don't send it to the buyer's lender. We don't send it to the title company. Doesn't show up on the closing statement. We get the closing statement. Maybe we catch it then, or the buyer catches it, even worse. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've got to change all of these statements. And again, just causes kind of confusion and panic and chaos last minute, which is unnecessary. So you're absolutely right. Send amendments. Anytime you get amendment signed, send it to title and lender. Let them decide if it's necessary or not. But especially if you're getting some form of credits, or maybe there's a sale price adjustment. In lieu of repair, seller to reduce the sale price $5,000. That doesn't make its way to the lender. All right, so make sure that's really, really important. The other thing with the cost as well is that letting your client know, on average, it seems that I look at a lot of closing statements. It seems that most title companies are about $500 to $600 in closing fees if you have the seller. So letting your seller know. Now, granted, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a ton of money when we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in the sale price. But if you've got a seller that's maybe pretty tight on equity and they're potentially having to bring money to the table, that can be a great deal of money to them. So making sure you let them know that as well, that the title company generally on the sell side is going to charge somewhere, it's closer to $600 usually. Some could be a little bit higher. If you see title fees more than that on the sell side, this is not buy side, because you have title insurance and policy and all that on the buy side. This is sell side. If you're seeing your title companies charging more than $600, you may want to shop around a little bit or ask them to lower their fee.
And even with that, you can ask your title company for quotes, and they're going to say $495, but there might be some recording fees on top of that. There might be some fees from the buyer side. And so there's a lot of and a lot of those are going to be small, like $30 here and there. But make sure that you kind of generalize that in your conversation with your clients. Say, well, it's going to be $495 as the base fee, but there could be additional fees from the buyer's title. And then don't forget your HOA payoff, your tax payoff, your what are some other fees that we see on there, Michael? We got seller credit, HOA proration down to the day, or just like tax proration down to the day. Your sewer bill is often going to be a little bit elevated so that there's no lapse. So MSD will charge you for 9 months, or no, not mine, 90 days upon closing, so that when the buyers come in and give their information, there's no delay in that payment. And so then they send a check back to the seller. There would be seller credits in there, pay off to the mortgage or HELOC, as well as commissions.
Yeah. There's I'm just looking at one right now too. Settlement closing fee $395. Yeah, lots of like recording fees.
So as much as I like to give the clients a good idea of what I also make sure that I generalize this. I don't know what miscellaneous fees are gonna come up. If you have a trustee letter from an HOA that's by a management company, a lot of times they will charge between $50 and $150. And sometimes those have to be paid prior to even receiving the report. And so the title company will let us know if your particular HOA applies to that. But those could be quote unquote closing fees that are required before closing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then there's a lot of like recording fee, exchange fee, e-recording fee. They're like $27, $75, $8. The big fees generally $395 or $495. So yeah, but you're absolutely right. Things can pop up. So just setting and now again, in the grand scheme of things, when people are selling a house for hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's not a lot, but let's just say they weren't aware of it. And they weren't aware, and all of a sudden it's $600 less than they were getting. And then let's say there was a commission issue that we caught, but the clients already looked at it. So they were expecting to get back, I don't know, $10,000. And now there was $5,000 short on commissions. Now they're getting like $4,500 back. It just doesn't look good. So one piece of advice would be, I would recommend looking at your closing statements prior to having the client see it, having it sent to the client. You review it, take a look at it, looks good, you tell title, then they can send it over. And that's pretty much what our process has been, correct, Sarah?
Say that again, that we approve it. Yeah.
We review it prior to the client seeing it.
Yeah. You know, we know what we know. I usually take the title fees as what they are and just make sure that taxes aren't exorbitant, you know, and make sure that, you know, home warranty is the agreed upon contract price. Seller credit is agreed upon contract price. But yes, I usually look at every line item in the statement before sending it to the clients.
Yeah, it's going to save you a lot of pain, potential pain and anguish by doing that. So again, a lot of this is just being proactive. A lot of it's being just ahead of it and not reactive. I'll throw this in too. The same thing with the inspections. When you have an inspector, you have a buyer, or excuse me, a seller especially, or either one really. But inspector goes out, does the inspection, they send the report. I would have your inspector send the inspection report to you first. I would ask them if they would do that. If you have a good relationship with your inspector, send it to you first. Or let's say you have the seller and the buyer agent sends the inspection report to you, and then you just forward it to your seller and say, hey, I'll call you. I'm on appointments. I'll call you tonight and we can discuss this. What happens when you do that is that seller opens up that report and they see 100 pages or 200 pages of stuff, and they see everything that's wrong with their house, and they start freaking out. And they start getting angry and they start saying, I'm not fixing all of this stuff, even though maybe the buyer only wanted them to fix 1 or 2 items, but we just sent that and said, we'll call you tonight. Now they're stewing on this thing for 4, 5, 6 hours. They're furious. You call them. Now you have to calm them down. So what I recommend as well is reviewing the seller's disclosure, reviewing the inspection reports ahead of time, scheduling time then to talk to your client before you send it. Hey, I've got the reports. Do you have some time? We can talk about this today. Was 3 o'clock work or 5 better, whatever the case may be. Schedule that, send it, and then start going through the report with them. Because a lot of times people just assume that they're going to have to fix all of that stuff. So again, a lot of it's just being very proactive and making sure that that we're not just catching our clients off guard. Let's see, as a reminder, or could some of these things be put on our selling or buying check off list? Yeah, absolutely. I don't see why not. Do you see that getting added to a checklist, Sarah?
I have almost everything that I say verbally documented in email or info doc, because everybody's got a different brain. Maybe, and I don't want to have to remember 100 things to mention, right? I want to make sure that I have documented this somewhere. Yes, absolutely. It could be supplemented in your emails or your templates. You know, the things that have to do with money, or the things that cause the high anxiety, I would definitely make a conversation about it. But there are other things that you can include in a checklist, and maybe let those be checklist items and really address the items that are, you know,
Did you see that?
high, you know, anxiety.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the more checklist you have for the process, the better off you will be. I've mentioned this before, but I was an aviation major in college. I was a pilot, had my pilot's licenses. And when you fly an airplane, there's a checklist for everything. There's a checklist before you get in the airplane. There's a checklist before you start the engine. There's a checklist before you taxi. There's a checklist before you take off. There's a checklist after you take off. There's a checklist before you land. I mean, there is a checklist for everything. And what happens when you don't follow the checklist is you do what my buddy did. He forgot to put the landing gear down on a twin engine Duchess, and he destroyed the airplane. And so, you know, he had like 6 or 7 or 1,000 hours. I can't remember. He had a lot of flight time, felt confident, knew what he was doing, didn't follow his checklist, made a very, very, very big mistake. So I feel in business, checklists are extremely important. It allows you not to make mistakes. If you're looking at your checklist and checking things off, less mistakes will happen. So I think absolutely, Sherry, having a checklist in place for this is very, very important. Because when you don't, mistakes get made, things happen. Or even when we're like, no, I've got this. I've got 1,000 deals under my belt. I know what I'm doing. Stuff happens. We forget. We get busy. We get tied up. We get phone calls. We start dealing with other clients. Things happen. So the more checklist you have, the better your business is going to be. Absolutely. Anything else to add on that one, Sarah?
No, I've talked in a couple of my trainings before. The more checklists you have, the more you lean into those, the more free your brain is to sell another house.
Definitely. Yes, because you're not just so wrapped up in the one transaction.
Mm-hmm. When I started, when I started, I was like, oh, I can handle this in my brain, or, I don't necessarily need this or that or the other. But once you get 2 or 3 going, you start to second guess yourself, or you have to say, did I do that? Did I do that? Oh, I did or I didn't, where you can either just glance on your checklist or allow your checklist to dictate your day. Don't think,
Agreed.
just read your checklist.
Yeah, definitely. Makes a big difference in your business. It really does. It's the same way, like why I'm such a big believer in following a calendar. Um, when I didn't back in the day, I was like, well, I'll remember. I've got an appointment tomorrow. I'll remember. I won't forget. And I didn't follow a calendar, and I would double book myself constantly. Now, granted, this was before the electronic calendars. It was back at the good old U.S. title calendar days. Everybody that was in real estate in between 2005 and probably 2009 or 10 had a U.S. title calendar. Seemed like it anyway. But I didn't follow a calendar, and I would constantly double book myself on appointments. So having a system in place, whether it's through checklist and having schedules and calendar, things of that nature will really, really help. So yeah, good information there, Sarah. Really good point. And the last thing we have here is, what do you do if a seller wants an open house every weekend? So who's had that happen where the seller wanted open houses every weekend? We've all probably been there. I think the best thing to do with sellers that want open houses is address this from the very beginning at the listing presentation. So if you followed our listing presentation in networkglobalagents.com under the listing section, you will see we have a slide in there that talks about open houses and it says, how do you feel for the client? How do you feel about open houses? Because I want to gauge what their response is going to be. I love open houses. If they love open houses, I love open houses too. If they hate open houses, I hate open houses too. And so I'm going to gauge the response. Well, we love open houses. That's great. I love open houses as well. And were you aware that only 5% of homes sell from an actual open house? No, I wasn't. That seems low. It is. It's really low. The National Association of Realtor Statistics shows us that less than 5% of homes sell from an open house. So while I love doing open houses and I'm more than happy to do them, me doing an open house every single weekend at your home until it sells is probably not the best use of my time or your time. And so instead of asking you to leave your home every Sunday, what I'm going to recommend is that we do an open house in the very beginning when we list your home. And should your home not sell, and in the unlikely event we may have to do a price adjustment, then we'll do another one at that time. How does that sound? So I'm setting the stage right from the beginning that we're not going to do them every weekend. Because if me going to an open house, here's what's going to happen. The first weekend, and especially if the house is overpriced, the first weekend I'm going to get a lot of activity, most likely, because we're in a seller's market. There's limited inventory, so people are going to come out. The next weekend, people may come, but it's going to be less. The third weekend, there's probably nobody showing up, maybe 1 or 2 people. But the fourth weekend, definitely nobody. So setting the stage up front, I think, is very important. Same way if they hate open houses. Totally understand you're not a fan of open houses, and that's okay, because to be honest, less than 5% of homes actually sell from an open house. So I'd love to do one in the beginning, but I understand that you don't like them, and so that's not a problem. I'm going to focus my time and attention on the 95% of things that I've covered with you today on our marketing strategy to ensure that I get your home sold. So let's not worry about doing any open houses. So I think setting the stage up front for people like that during the listings will go a long way. And that way they're not expecting you to show up every single weekend and do an open house from 1 to 3 or 2 to 4, whatever the case may be, thinking that that's actually going to get the house sold. Any other thoughts or points around that one, Sarah?
No, I think, like you said, it's an early conversation. And don't be afraid to be strong about your opinions. Not that you're being the jerk agent, and not that you're never going to give them an open house because they don't work. Sometimes you got to concede a little bit, give them that first one. But remind them and continually remind them, and go back to that strategy that you talked about in the presentation. We've talked about this. It doesn't work. We've talked about this. It's 5%. We've talked about this. I'll do one this week, but we're not, don't be afraid to be that strong agent, because that shows your expertise in the field.
Agreed. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I see that Chandra just said, ha, I remember the U.S. title calendars. And Lisa said, I still use one like the U.S. title calendar. Absolutely. But it's not the official U.S. title calendar, is it, Lisa?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. all the old school agents here. We all know about the famous U.S. title calendar, so that's hilarious. Well, cool. Well, I appreciate everybody being on. That's all we've got for today. Hopefully, this was helpful. We try to do these about once a month or once every 6 weeks. As we get new issues that pop up, new things that pop up, we keep just trying to bring them to you. So again, we can educate ourselves, keep getting better, learn from others' mistakes. That's the biggest lessons I think we can learn is learning. Of course, learning from our own mistakes, but what's better than that is learning from somebody else's mistakes, in my opinion. So if we can learn from things that have happened to others that didn't happen to us, and we can make sure they never happen to us, that's even better. So that's all I've got. Sarah, anything to add before we wrap up?
The only thing I want to add is the new SLAR training on the contract forms next week, October 2nd. If you have not read your SLAR emails this week, go find it in your inbox. Go sign up for one because they're going to be going over the changes in the forms that are coming. They were supposed to come October 1st, but changes upon changes. It's supposed to be mid-October when these new ones come out where the CCD is going away. So directly from SLAR, October 2nd.
Yeah, let's get on that. We'll see if we can somehow live stream that too. Potentially, we'll take a look at that. But yeah, we appreciate everybody being on today. Also, if you have not signed up, I think everybody watching has signed up for our Success Conference Business Planning on Tuesday, October 1st. It's next week. It's coming up quick. That is at the St. Louis Association of Realtors. It's in-person only event. Make sure you sign up. We've got just a few seats left. So make sure you sign up. And Leo just dropped the link in there as well. Thank you for that. But that's all we've got for today. We really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for being on. Have a great rest of the day. If you need anything, give us a call. Thanks everyone.